Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for December 5th, 2022. Today I'm going to be looking at the question, is there any sanity at all coming from Western leaders, leaders of the NATO countries? Well, there seems to be a few interesting developments. President Macron, back from his meeting with Biden, sounded almost rational in a statement that he delivered on France's TV1. He said that the West should consider how to give security guarantees to Russia. Here are his exact words. He said, "This means that one of the essential points we must address, as President Putin has always said, is that the fear that NATO comes right up to its doors and the deployment of weapons that could threaten Russia. That topic will be part of the topics for peace, so we need to prepare what we are ready to do, how we protect our allies and member states, and how to give guarantees to Russia the day it returns to the negotiating table." Now, the reason I say this is a moderate statement is that while it's true, Putin has insisted going back to December of last year that Russia's legitimate security guarantees have been ignored. And Macron is saying that these are legitimate guarantees that they're asking for. But he's still saying that we have to wait till Russia agrees to return to the negotiating table. The Russians have already agreed to that. It's the Ukrainians who have refused. But this is an interesting step forward. Now, there's also a sign that maybe other countries are not ready to leap over the cliff. In an exchange between Secretary of State Blinken and CNN's Jake Tapper on Sunday. Tapper asked him why the Biden administration is not prepared to sanction Russia or declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism as a result of its bombing of Ukrainian power plants and the electricity grid. And Tapper noted that this is supported by both parties, including former or current Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Now, Blinken said such a designation had consequences whose effects you could not predict. Well, that's true. But let's ask what those consequences might be. If you're going to state that regarding Russia, what about the U.S. NATO policies in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria? Don't those qualify for state sponsor of terrorism? So perhaps Blinken is putting on the brakes before opening a door that the United States does not want open. Now, other than these statements, though, NATO's provocations continue in line with the endless war against Russia and containment of China that was put forward at the NATO Foreign Ministers' Witches' Sabbath that just took place in Bucharest. The line that came out from NATO leaders is the pledges of unending support to Ukraine for weapons deliveries and financial aid, the call for no appeasement of Putin, and the belief in the righteousness of their cause and also the success in their cause, in spite of the reality on the ground in which very few parts of Ukraine have access to electricity right now. That today is the beginning of the next phase of the extended sanctions policy against Russia, with the European Union seaborne oil embargo against Russian oil. That begins today. And also the European Union is putting a price cap on oil at $60 per barrel. This comes into effect beginning today. Russia has made clear they're not going to accept this. They're going to ignore the cap on oil prices and provide oil to countries who are willing to work with them. Now, if you're going to cap Russian oil prices, how about a cap on U.S. liquid natural gas prices, which are bankrupting European countries at a point in which they're desperate for any form of energy given the embargo and the sanctions against Russia. Now, Deputy Russian Prime Minister Alexander Novak had a comment on the price cap. And what he said is that there are implications that the West has to face on this. And what he said is that, quote, "We think that such interference may entail further destabilization, shortages of energy resources, and reduction of investments. It may be applied not only to oil, but to other products on the market, and not only to Russia, but to other countries as well," unquote. Points well taken. The idea of a free market, which is completely violated by such agreements and such sanctions, is obvious. But the fact that this is not going to be just limited to Russia, if this is acceptable, is a point that Western governments have to consider. Now, further evidence of Western delusions was the announcement yesterday of the second Summit for Democracy at the end of March 2023. You may remember the first summit was in December 2021, precisely at the point that Putin was pressing ahead his demands for legitimate security guarantees for Russia, which was ignored by the West. At the same point, they were hailing themselves as democracies. They were refusing to negotiate with Russia's President Putin and refusing to impose on Ukraine that they live up to the signed agreements they made in the Minsk II Accords to end the fighting in the Donbass and to grant limited autonomy to the Donbass regions. So the so-called democracies refused to negotiate at the point at which they patted themselves on the back for how democratic they are. Now, they reiterated the, quote, 5 pillars, unquote, of the Summit for Democracy. And when you hear these and apply them to the real situation in the world, you'll realize how hypocritical these people are. Can they actually look themselves in the mirror and honestly say that they're trying to preserve peace and democracy? For example, supporting free and independent media. All you have to do is look at the banning and censorship that's going on in the West, the shutting down of RT and Sputnik and Russian media, the attacks on such platforms as Twitter and others. Where's the democracy? And the free and independent media? Every opposition press in Ukraine has been shut down by that paragon of democracy, Zelensky. So that's one pillar. Throw that one out the window. Secondly, fighting corruption. I'm sure you've heard about the Monaco Brigade. That is the Ukrainian oligarchs who are siphoning funds from US and NATO aid for their vacation homes in Monaco and on the Riviera. Bolstering democratic reformers. Well, they've shut down all the opposition parties in Ukraine. Advancing technology for democracy. What is that referring to? Hybrid warfare, information warfare, control of the media, and finally, defending free and fair elections. I hardly have to comment on that for it to be clear that this is a complete example of hypocrisy. Now, to impose and to enforce these mechanisms, these pillars, the State Department's U.S. Agency for International Development, run by war hawk Samantha Powers, has guaranteed $20 million going to 17 countries for, quote, information operations. Many of these are connected to the International Partnership for Information and Democracy. Now, they're also under fighting corruption, talking about accountability tools such as financial sanctions to punish offenders. The USAID in September, listen to this quote, rolled out a cutting-edge guide on de-kleptification to support frontline actors engaged in uprooting entrenched kleptocratic structures, unquote. Is there a more kleptocratic structure in the world today than the Zelensky regime? Well, tomorrow I'll have more on the motion to establish a universal payment system outside of the control of the City of London and Wall Street. Major movers in this are the BRICS Plus and the Eurasian Economic Union. The question is, can European Union nations in the midst of imposed deindustrialization, inflation, and shortages, find the courage to break away from the unipolar order. Also tomorrow, I'll have a review of the process called pre-bunking, which is part of the information control that's just praised by the promoters of this second summit for democracy. So with that, let me check out for today, and I'll see you again tomorrow.